All right.
Tobias, welcome to the show.
Hi there. I'm Miriam.
You've been recommended to me from so many different angles that I'm overly curious.
That's nice.
Yes.
I won't even ask about which angles, but it's always nice to hear that. Yeah.
Yeah, I put it on LinkedIn and several people tagged you. And I always enjoy kicking off the conversation with one question is, when did you start calling yourself a facilitator? And do you?
I think a long time ago, probably back in the 90s, maybe even before that. Yeah, in the early 1990s, I started working for government training programs, helping, first of all, young people get into the workplace, and then older people get back into the workplace after, downturn of economy or people losing jobs. And so I was called a trainer, but it never quite sat well with me. So I always felt that I was facilitating change or facilitating learning for somebody. And so it kind of just stayed with me. And then I worked in, so this is all before I became involved in the IT world. I was working in that field and then in youth work. And I worked for a period of time for the Refugee Council in Brixton in London, and running similar kind of programs. And in this case, it was helping people who had just recently moved to the UK from all kinds of different places, and not by choice, most of the time, and helping them to adjust and kind of figure out what the skills that they had and how they might be applicable in the new context they found themselves in. So it was not training. It's very much not training. It was very much about facilitating and lifting. I mean, there's something about lifting people, I think, in that as well. Yeah.
I think it's very interesting because the examples you're giving it could be very quickly in the box of training, or even in the box of, let me give you a presentation. Right? Let's invite people and bombard them with information, which is even less than training. So
yes.
Where does the difference for you come in between training and facilitation? Where did this lifting happen? What are the tools you're using?
The tools are the human beings themselves, essentially, and the relationship between them. So that's really all you need. You need the people who are there are the people who are there, and they have and will develop relationships between them and with me as the person facilitating or holding the space, if you like, holding the space for learning. But in contexts like the one I'm describing, there can be no expert, because each person has a unique story. A lot of it is about story, actually. It's about hearing story, not about telling stories so much, about hearing other people's stories and helping them to sometimes reframe aspects of that. So I don't know. I've never really felt like a trainer. When I learned about this thing called Scrum, which is what I teach quite a lot now, and I say use the word teach. We'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. But I teach that now. But when I was brought into that space, it was very much PowerPoint presentations, and a few little exercises kind of thrown into the mix, and it was called training, and I was called a trainer. And I never liked it. It never felt right, and I didn't. I learned from one person how to run these workshops, and I very quickly found my own style of holding these workshops and getting the same information across, and perhaps more information in more engaging ways. And so allowing, it's a team-centric way of working that I'm teaching. So inevitably one has to teach in teams, otherwise they're not learning what they
need to model it, right?
Need to model it, exactly. Well, that's a good word, actually, and that's a lovely word, I think. It is about modeling. It's about modeling the change that we want to imbue into people through the facilitation work that we do. That's what it is.
And I find it interesting, the difference between the work that you've done in the beginning as a trainer, but facilitating people connecting to each other and becoming the tool, as you said, and these people they were brought to the space without actually wanting it, and they didn't know each other so previously before joining the session that you hosted. They didn't know each other, they didn't have any connections. And now in the space that you're working, if I understand correctly, is teaching Scrum.
It is, yeah, that
teams.
is right.
So where's the difference? How do you create these connections between people who actually don't want to be there and still have to collaborate in the space and to connect?
Okay, let me just go back, right? So going from the work I used to do in the helping professions, I suppose you would loosely call that, I then went to university in my mid-30s and studied software engineering. I just became hooked on coding, basically. And so when I graduated, I moved to the States, coincidentally, and worked out there I lived and worked out there for about 17 years, actually. But, you know, moving into the coding space meant moving into the corporate world, essentially. You know, that's where it all happened, right? And I was kind of horrified by the environments that I found myself in, these big companies and people, hierarchical structures and people not listening to each other. And then when I found myself in the position of being a manager, I then kind of reached out for something that was more compatible with my way of being. And I came across Scrum. I came across Scrum through something called extreme programming, which was a method of writing code that was kind of on the rise at that point in time. And again, it's very, very teamwork oriented, very collaborative. And so what I found then was the way I wanted to manage people suddenly felt aligned with what I used to do in the helping professions, in that facilitation space. And I thought I can bring that way of working into this space, and it's okay, you know, because the things that I found in common is that the kind of people I was working with, especially the young people, this is very true of the young people in that area, is there was a level of oppression in society, and these people were at the bottom. They were being pushed down. They were the kids that were excluded from school, you know, the misbehaved, the badly behaved ones, and then working for refugee council, the people that were fleeing their country and had no status in this country whatsoever. You know, you're talking about people who owned farms in Ethiopia, for example, coming to live in Brixton with never been in a city before, you know, and suddenly they've gone from being quite important to feeling like nothing. So there was this sense of working with oppressed people. Now I'm finding myself in Silicon Valley in the USA, in the corporate world. I thought I'm as far away from oppression as I could be, but I'm not. I'm right in the middle of it, actually. And these corporations have some of the worst kind of oppression going on, because they do it impression behind a smile. And the people at the bottom of these corporate hierarchies are not happy. They're disengaged, they're angry, they're upset, they're unheard. And it's the same thing. It's just that they get paid a lot of money. That's the only difference, right? And of course it makes a big difference, you know, because people put up with quite a lot when they're paid well, but they're not happy for the most part. You know, of course, many people are and do enjoy that kind of work, but there was something that needed to shift and change. And that's what the whole agile movement is about. An agile movement is part of a bigger movement to humanize the workplace, essentially, and bring a sense of humanity back into these workplaces. We're still working on the Tayloristic model from the Industrial Revolution, you know, white collar, blue collar separation. We still have that model in place, driving people forward by rewards and punishments, and you know, seriously out of date ideas that just people won't let go of. And
taking away basically all the autonomy and creativity by putting them into boxes and processes.
Yeah.
So with
people in boxes, I mean, that's a big one. You know, what's interesting about the work I do is this thing called Scrum. We have this role in an organization called the Scrum Master. And the Scrum Master is a sort of a blend of facilitator, coach, educator, like the joker in the pack almost, you know, the wild card, the one who, like the court jester who speaks truth to power. And organizations can't handle this role at all. So they keep crushing it down. They keep trying to blend it in with other roles that they know are okay, like, you know, a release manager or engineering manager, or
process manager,
sort of a slash role, Scrum Master slash coach, Scrum Master slash manager. They can't just embrace the purity of this role because it's too damn scary, because they don't know where to put it. It doesn't fit the box. Like the HR department usually has very clear boxes, levels to put people in. The last full-time job I had, I was called project manager level 3 or some nonsense term like that. It meant nothing, you know. I've never learned to be a project manager in my life. I have no project management skills whatsoever.
And what you did was being a Scrum Master?
Well, a Scrum Master, basically, yeah. I mean, that's how I describe myself. And people wanted to call me a coach, or they wanted to call me a project manager. But would
you call a Scrum Master a facilitator?
Yes, very much so, yeah. They facilitate change. They facilitate space.
And collaboration and progress. And collaboration and progress.
Yeah, all of it. I mean, they're building an environment where people can thrive, right? So they're not in control of anything. They're not in control of any people. They are in control of making a space where people can grow. They're like gardeners, you know, in the way that a gardener facilitates the growth of a garden. It doesn't make it grow. He's there to support its growth and to provide for it, and to nurture it and care for it. And that's what a Scrum Master is. So there's a lot of facilitation in that. You know, you can think about a gardener as facilitating the growth of the plants, can't you? Because they're not managing them, they're not directing them, they're not shouting.
And they cannot force it. Faster. They cannot force it. They cannot make it rain.
They can't, exactly. Yeah. They can just do the best with what they've got, right? And also create, you know, like if a plant is not thriving, you can move a plant, you can put it into more sun or less sun, or you can give it more or less water, you can build shade, or you can build, you know, glass houses. And so there's a lot you can do, but ultimately the plant is going to do its own thing. And so are people are too.
And it's interesting. Yes, you can build a glass house or a greenhouse for some plants, and for some plants it might work and for others it doesn't. So you also have to decide on what tools to use, depending on the environment that you're in, that you cannot change.
Well, this is why these cookie cutter methods that people try and apply don't work. You know, when they come into an organization with these big change things called, you know, scaled agile framework, or the Spotify model, or whatever else, you know, they come in with these big things. They try and impose them on organizations from the top down. And it's kind of like saying all plants will thrive in a greenhouse. Well, many won't, they'll die, you know, and so everyone's not going to thrive in that kind of environment. A few might. Usually the people higher up in the organization do all right. But change needs to happen, the way I see it. It needs to happen from the ground up. It can't come top down. It really can't, you know. And people say, well, it has to come from both directions. Well, it has to be supported from above, but it has to change itself, has to happen lower down in an organization. And it's an organic thing. It has to grow through the experience of the people doing it.
Yes, and still this is a chicken and egg problem, right? Because literally nobody likes change that is put upon them. I don't like, if someone tells me to change, no, I don't want that.
I don't want that, no.
And still, I like all the change that comes from within me. So I want to change myself and grow all the time. So yes, it must come from within, because that's natural. But then there's always a more strategic vision or goal why change might be necessary, or in which direction it needs to go. That must be
you're
guided or inspired from above.
There's change of direction, there's change of vision, And that obviously needs to come from, I won't say above, but yeah, above in a sense that it's coming from a big picture view, isn't it? And you get the big picture view. Eagles have a big picture view more than mice do, right? But on the ground, the people doing the work are responsible for how the work is done. No one else is responsible for that. And they should probably be involved in vision making too, even though they may not be big picture thinkers. They may have some thoughts to contribute to that, but also need to step away and let the people who've got the skills in that area do the vision setting. We have, you know, we all have different skills, right? But what we have in the corporate world is someone who has risen up to a higher management position thinking they must know, or they're paid to know, right? They're just paid to know. And for one thing, that stops them learning anything new because they can't admit they don't know because they're paid to know. And therefore they think they have to tell other people what to do because that's how they got to where they are. So there's a lot of fear and a lot of terror in that middle management layer.
And I wonder, where do you think does this come from, that they have to, is it maybe a cognitive dissonance that, oh, I'm a manager, I'm paid this salary, this on my job description, so I have to know. So I don't want to admit to myself that I don't know, so I better believe it. And then I give directions as if I knew. Or is it an ego thing? I don't want to admit that I don't know. Or maybe just a lack of perspective that if I'm up there, I cannot even relate to the details down there. So it's absolute ignorance.
Yeah, it's probably a mix of all those things, and it's different for different people. And there are some amazingly good managers. Let's not you know, denigrate them all. Some great ones, and I've worked with some. But the structure itself doesn't lend itself to it doesn't build a learning environment. You know, if as you go higher up, you're expected to know more and more, you are encouraged to learn less and less by default almost. And so we're not building organizations that are primed for learning. So when people lower down in the organization request, you know, to be sent on a training course or to get some sort of learning time, very often it's denied. And the fact they even have to ask for it is wrong. It should be a given in a work package.
Yeah.
But, you know, let's go back to facilitation. Going back to facilitation, I facilitate work with managers too. So my preference is to work kind of ground up, but I will, and I have very often worked with management teams and executive teams as well. I don't like it as much, and I think it is because there's a greater degree of blockage. The more people believe they know, it's the filling up the cup thing, you know, the Zen story. You can't put more tea in a cup that's already full. It just spills out and makes a mess. And so when someone's cup is full, they're closed. Their mind is closed. And you get less of that when people are raw and newer. You know, even at the level of teaching people Scrum, those who've said they've been doing Scrum for 2 or 3 years, they're the ones who don't learn Scrum properly. I like to say properly, according to the rules, if you like. And other people are much more open to it because they know nothing. They come there with an empty mind, an empty cup.
Which is actually a nice angle to look at facilitation. To what extent is it, as you described, that many organizations fail to change because they try to apply a certain format that has worked for others on themselves, and then they wonder that it doesn't work because it doesn't come from within. It's not adjusted to their culture.
Right.
And similarly, a facilitator or a Scrum Master who is just coming with the same method, trying to impose it on a group and achieve the same results as in the textbook, might not actually work. So how much of the actual facilitation work is intuition and must be adjusted to the ecosystem in which it's applied?
Well, there's some intuition in there, but I think that there's also some basic rules to follow. And the first one is come in to listen, don't come in to tell. You know, that's a great starting point, isn't it, for any facilitator in any situation? Because the chances are you don't know very much about the group or the organization that you're about to work for. Now, if you're an internal person, you've been in the organization for some time and you're facilitating change from within, then that's slightly different. But for the most part, we're invited in. Well, I certainly am. I'm invited in from the outside, you know, and very often in those situations, the people that I find myself working with didn't really have a choice. They just tell you're going to come to this thing, this session, this training, this whatever it is, you know. And so there's some resistance, and some people aren't necessarily there because they want to be. That's why I much prefer open public workshops for learning, where people come because they choose to come.
And I wonder whether this is actually also the best way to drive change, because change is basically mostly behavioral change.
Yeah.
And as you said, maybe the key aspect is to relearn to ask questions, or to unlearn the thought or belief that a manager is to know it all. And the best way to learn that, or to change the behavior, is actually to experience a facilitated workshop.
It could be, yeah. I mean, very often it's quite difficult to get managers to even into the room. Some of that work, but you know, like I say, there are some good ones, and the good ones are there and willing to experience something different, a different way of being. You know, so it's.
And you mentioned coming in to listen as one of the facilitation skills.
Yeah.
What are for you the core facilitation skills?
Well, so there's a lot in the work that I do, in the space that I'm in the agile world. There's a big lot of excitement around the idea of games for learning, and people facilitating games. And I've used games of one kind or another in the past, but there's different kind of games. There's games that have an intended outcome. So I'm going to play this game so you will learn this principle or this skill. I don't like those games. So one of my principles is never play games with defined outcomes. Only ever play a game where you have no idea what's going to happen. It's just like, see what, you know, it's got structure, it's got rules, but you don't know the end result. And you're often, well, I am often surprised by what occurs in these games. And I go with it. I don't try and guide people back to what I think they ought to learn. I go with the learning that's occurring. It's much more exciting.
And it's so funny, when I train facilitation, I say basically the same thing about questions. Never ask a question when there is a correct answer.
That's another one of my principles. Thank you. I was going to say that one. I love that. It's kind of mind blowing for people when you tell them that, because so much of what the corporate world training is people running quizzes or you know, asking people questions, and that people just put their hand up and get the right answer. It's like being in school, you know. It shouldn't even be like that in schools, actually.
I have a theory about that, if I may share.
Sure, I'd love to.
Similar to what you shared about the workforce and training that is still kind of related to the industrial age. Yeah. I think that how we our understanding of questions is still related to the industrial age, where we ask questions to find answers, because all the answers were in books or in the library or in church, and there were only few who had them. Today, answers are actually just a mouse click away. So we are asking questions to find new perspectives instead of answers. And I think this mindset shift around questions and why we ask questions hasn't happened yet.
It hasn't really happened, has it? Because there's still this thing in many workshops where they do Q&A at the end of the workshop or throughout the workshop. And it dawned on me quite a while ago now that I didn't know the answers. So I couldn't do a Q&A. I could do questions and responses, Or I could do questions and maybe, what I started calling it one time was Q and BQ, questions and better questions. So I've taken a question and say, how do we make that into a better question? I'll give you an example of a question that you can turn into a better question. And this comes up a lot in my work. People say, well, how does, they say Scrum, but they say, how does Scrum help me deal with bugs? And so I get them to sort of pause about that, and I'll ask, well, why do you have bugs in your software? Well, everyone has bugs. I said, well, actually, that's not true. Not every software engineer writes bugs into their code. Some don't. And they can't believe that for a start. So I said, maybe another question would be, how do we avoid getting bugs in our system? That's a different question. It's a better question, isn't it? Because it drives you to take responsibility for the change rather than saying to me, how are you going to fix my bugs?
And how is the method being the holy grail to the bugs?
Right.
Although it's not, yeah.
So it's about, and this is what one of the skills of the Scrum Master is to turn things around and kind of bounce them back to the person, so that each of us may take responsibility. So when people come to me as a Scrum Master and say, you've got to fix X, Y, and Z, this is broken, can you? I would say, well, what would you like to do about it? And I emphasize the you. What would you like to do about it? I want you to fix it. Well, I might be able to do that, but it might, if it happens again, then I'm not around, what's going to happen then? And so it's like, what would you like to do? What could you do about it? What can you and your team do about this today so that it won't happen again? So you're always bouncing it back and putting the responsibility, because if you don't do that, you'll just Mr. Fix It, Mr. and you can't go away because you're always the one who knows.
You become the micromanager.
Yeah.
And two things pop up in my mind now that you're speaking. One is, now I better understand what you meant by you're lifting the group when you're coming in as a facilitator. The second thing reminds me of something that you said during our exploration call, that the facilitator is actually the difficultator. Because the moment when I listen to you, your Q&A, facile, making it easy, give me the damn answer. Right? I ask you a question, give me the answer. What you do is you actually make it more difficult for the person.
In the short
term, you're making it more difficult, but at the same time, giving them the agency to find their own answer and thereby growing. And that's another twist. So for me, a question is a gift to someone, because with a question, you're inviting someone to explore within themselves to find an answer.
Yeah, certain kinds of questions are gifts. Not all questions are gifts. I mean, some questions can be threats.
And weapons, actually. Yes.
A weapon, can't they? I mean, the kind of questions people often ask in workshops like Ryan is how questions. How do we do this with Scrum, or how do we fix this thing? And I always kind of wrap all of those questions up into a single question, saying, this is context specific for one thing, and I can't answer these questions. But I'll tell you what the answer is, and it's come straight out of Peter Block. The answer to how is yes. So yes, you can make these changes. Now, how you do it is up to you, and it's up to your context, and it's up to the people you work with, but it can be done, I promise you that. So it's really just giving them an affirmative and saying, yes, you can do that. Now go away and figure out how to do it, because you own the how, I don't own the how. I can't, I'm just an outside person, right? I'm a 2-day class teacher, maybe, or at the best, a few months in an organization.
And two things come to my mind. One is, then it really depends, you're really relying on having the best people around you who indeed have the ability to fix it and to figure out the how.
Well, it doesn't mean no, that's not necessarily true. I mean, often you don't, right? And so the question then is, well, what can you do about it? And if you keep persisting with what can I do, and you run up against wall after wall, and block after block, then what you can do is change jobs. That's your choice, right? You always have that choice. But obviously we want to, if we like the work and we like the people we work with, we want to help make change happen, and very often it's not possible, or it's only possible up to a certain ceiling, and then it just gets stopped and blocked, But if you, I don't think we can rely too much on other people, or certainly not people above us. We can rely on one another as peers, as teammates. I think that's really important, and building up that sense of camaraderie and the strength of unity, and the whole being greater than the sum of its parts, and all that good stuff, you know. And there's a lot of reliance there and trust that builds up. But if we start relying on the leader to fix things for us, we're always going to be in trouble, because it's not going to happen. And if it happens, it's short term, you know. Leaders go away.
And it creates dependency and doesn't make us happy ultimately. I think.
Yeah. We've got the relationship between people in the corporation with leadership is like a parent-child relationship. It's very unhealthy, because we're adults, we're not children. And
we all end up in therapy.
As a result of that, most likely. Yeah.
I think as a parent, you can only fail. Either you're too perfect or you're doing.
Well, there's another parent-child relationship right in the therapy room, so go bounce from one to the other. So, I don't know. Yeah. You know, I think one of the thing about this kind of work, in fact, I think most of my friends who are coaches, and I wouldn't class myself among them, but most of my friends who are coaches have the same philosophy. It's like, I don't want to be there for long. I want to raise people up so they can manage their own lives effectively. You know, short-term solution-focused psychotherapy is the same. It's very similar to coaching in that sense. You know, it's just like lifting people out of their slump, out of their depression, or helping them cope better with their anxiety or their addiction or whatever it is, and move on. You know, just like do life now. Don't just come back every week to talk about your problems, because you're churning in that sense, churning around. And all of this we're talking about, it's all facilitation. Back to the topic, right? You know, whether we often think about facilitation as having a group come into a room and do something or other to solve a problem, or, you know, discover something new or something. And that is part of it, of course, but it's the working inside organizations. It's in this environment creation thing, the gardening metaphor I used, that's facilitation. That's facilitating space and facilitating relationships between people. And all of that is facilitation. And sometimes it's difficultation, because it isn't always about being easy, is it? It's about being confrontational with compassion. And to confront with compassion is a fine art.
Can you elaborate on that?
Well, you know, confrontation is often given a bad rap, isn't it? It's like we don't want to be confrontational. We want things to be nice and to be smooth and everyone's kind to each other. But kindness and niceness are not the same. You know, sometimes the cruel to be kind thing, you know, it's like sometimes you have to just say it like it is in order for people to wake up. And
radical candor.
Yeah, that's a great term. Yeah, radical candor. You know, people who have a relative or a close friend who's an alcoholic or a drug addict, they only up to a point can you tolerate it, right? At some point you've got to speak up to it. You've got to confront them about it, and otherwise it will just drift on. It will just continue. And the kindest, most loving act you can do in a situation like that is to speak the truth, you know, bluntly, but not without love. You can do that rudely and you can do it aggressively, and that doesn't help. People can't listen to that. But in the corporate world, we need some of that too, you know, because we get caught up in old patterns of behavior, a lot of fear-based behavior, because we don't want to rock the boat, you know, worried about getting fired or what my manager's going to think, or not getting a good review at the end of the year and a bonus. And so we just toe the line very often. And if everyone just keeps doing that, nothing ever changes, does it? And so sometimes you need people to step outside of that, and they need to be shaken a little bit to have the guts to do it.
And then the question is how much leverage does a facilitator actually has if the environment, the ecosystem is not up for it?
Almost no power. but I don't know that a facilitator needs to have power. What the facilitator is trying to do is to help people step into their own power at whatever level they're comfortable with, and to increase that and improve it. You know, and there are people I've worked with who leap at this opportunity and they go charging in and they make demands and they lose their jobs. So you've got to be cautious up to, you know, there's a balance, isn't there?
Or not.
We want to be able to help things to shift in the corporate world, because we need to. Everyone needs to do that. It's not nice to have, it's an essential, actually. And at the same time, we have to do it with gentleness, we have to do it with love, and we have to do it with often with quite a slow pace, perhaps slower than you might like. You know, when I started doing this kind of work, I was very impatient. I couldn't believe that people didn't see the world as I saw the world. You know, it's so obvious, you know, you've got to do this, otherwise you know, this will happen and that will happen, and they weren't ready, and they turned away from me.
How did you learn that?
Huh?
How did you learn to be more patient?
Through a series of rejections and getting fired, I suppose, or something like that. It's just, you know, after a while, you just see the futility of it, right? And so now I am more patient and more gentle. And I coming back to that facilitation skill, listening, right? That's I had to learn to do that. I'm not naturally a good listener. I had to learn that. I'm a good talker, but my talking isn't that useful in the work that I do. At the beginning, it is as it progresses, because I'm talking things that come from experience, so it is useful. But at the beginning, it's if you're not ready to hear, you're not going to hear, are you? So
yeah, first need to build the trust and the curiosity to then be open to listen.
Exactly.
And the rapport.
You know, I found the other thing is just asking people about themselves is really powerful. Just like coming in with curiosity. Who are you? Where are you from? What happened? You know, how did you find yourself? How did you get here? What was your experience before? And then getting into some more personal. You got cat hair on you. You've got cats at home. How many cats have you got? You know, just kind of like getting curious. And people love talking about themselves for the most part. And then they think you're a nice guy because you've heard them. You know, so, and then they're comfortable, they're ready then to be a bit more open, perhaps, or to not think you're coming in to fix them. I think that's really important to get that message across really early. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm not here to change you. I'm not here to tell you how to do your work.
And I would like to link this back to the observation of patience, because I think who's even less patient than many facilitators are the leadership, the managers who might call facilitators to help facilitate the change. And please, we actually need it yesterday. So can you please make them accept the change?
Yeah.
Can you please fix them?
Yeah.
And then you tell them, I'm not here to fix them. I'm here to lift them. And then you come in and say, okay, so let's start with turn to your neighbor and share about who you are and some personal sides. And it happened to me that then the manager said, I don't have time for this woo-woo. And we are not here to talk about our personal lives, but to make a strategy. So how do you facilitate patience in organizations, and patience and curiosity, so that you actually
some of that then becomes, you know, I think in those situations, and I've experienced almost exactly what you're talking about there. You need one-on-one time with those individuals to try and understand what is it that's making them panic. You know, what is the rush? What is the urgency? And are they looking for a quick short-term fix, or are they looking for something more sustainable? And, you know, honestly, sometimes they're looking for a short-term fix because they want to prove themselves and get their bonus and get out and find another job somewhere else. Executives are they're ship hopping all the time. The higher up you go in the corporate world, the less time executives seem to spend in these places. I mean, that's my experience of it anyway. And, you know, of course, you've got exceptions to that. But see, the life of a CEO now in the Silicon Valley area is something like 3 to 4 years. Yeah, they don't stay
It's
much longer than
dangerous.
that.
I mean, from a game theoretical point of view, that's very dangerous. They're
Well,
playing.
you can't really make sustainable change in that time, can you? You can only, you see, the thing is, and what we're up against, I think the thing that all the people like us are up against in the corporate world is the primacy of shareholders, because it's all focused on short-term profit to benefit the shareholders, the stockholders, at the expense of any kind of long-term strategy or kindness to the employees. So it's always, the focus is wrong. You can't change that really within the system we're in. It takes a unique company to want something more than that.
And I wonder if this is the reality. We can sit here and hope for a better world, and we can complain about the existing structures and how they're playing the game. What can we as facilitators do to accept these structures and this reality and still do the best in our job to lift the individuals and to empower them and to make the best out of it?
Well, I mean, I don't know that there's a huge amount you can do from a systemic point of view. Systems change when enough people in the system want the change. So if people in the system are complacent or accepting or just don't care, then it won't change. But what comes to mind is that story about the little girl finding the starfish on the beach and throwing them back in the sea one by one, and a man commenting, "You can't possibly save all of them, it's a waste of time." And she picks up one and she says, "It's not a waste of time for this one." She throws it in the water. And this is a bit what it's like, isn't it? It's like, for me, I realized, I don't know when it was, maybe 8 or 9 years ago, it suddenly dawned on me that I couldn't change organizations. It was futile to try. And it was arrogant as well. But what I could change was possibly one person's mind. I'm not saying change the person, just change their mind. And that will ultimately have a ripple effect, I think. And so, you know, it's like the single starfish. If I can put one starfish back in the water, that starfish is going to propagate and have more starfish. And so this person who has change in an organization is going to possibly leave that organization because it no longer serves their purpose, and go somewhere else and instigate some change there. And so, and we do see this kind of small chain reaction occurring in the agile world. You know, more and more people are getting it and wanting it, you know, wanting some form of a different way of working. Some people just want the same way of working with pretty names imposed on the top, you know, like a sort of facade. Yeah. But there are a lot of people who are genuinely waking up, you know, and there's this shift, right? There really is a shift towards the humane workplace, and there's resistance to it because the status quo doesn't accept it. But if that push gets big enough, it's gonna push, you know. It's just like, if the world gets warm enough, the ice is going to melt. There's not much we can do about it, right? It's the same kind of thing. If enough people care, it's a form of revolution. I mean, we're not talking like French Revolution, storming of the Bastille, or maybe we are, I don't know. But I don't imagine it's going to be violent, but it's going to be strong, though. It's going to be a strong force of change that's going to happen.
And I think the more working from home or working from anywhere is allowed, the stronger the push will be. And that's, I believe, many leaders, CEOs are against the working from home, because you cannot micromanage employees who are working from home. You cannot shout at them because, oh, internet connection bad, shutting down, sorry, didn't hear you.
Yeah, it has changed things, hasn't it? You know, I was never a fan of online teamwork or anything before COVID, and when COVID came, I chose not to work for the first 6 months or so, because I just thought I'll just wait for it to pass, and then it'll go back to in-person work, but it didn't pass, of course. And so I began to rethink, how can I, because I hadn't facilitated online. Up to then, I'd only facilitated in person, and I couldn't conceive of it. But I did start to think about it. I had conversations with people I trust who were doing it, and got some ideas about how it would be. And it's not just porting, it's really not. And I've seen people that do the same thing as me, try to port their classes from live to online. It's disastrous, awful. It's just a totally different medium, so you have to reinvent it, right? You have to reinvent it. But you're right in that, I think you're right anyway, in that it's self-organization happens in these environments, these Zoom environments, in a way that gets blocked in an office place by management, not intentionally perhaps, but just by their presence sometimes. And when they're not around, their presence is not felt as strongly, people figure out how to do things in their own way. And so I think, yeah, you're right, that there's a force that's getting bigger because of this working from home thing. Which is a really surprising thing to me, actually. I thought it would kind of dissolve it in some way, but it hasn't. It's even more strong.
Yeah. Let's hope. And I was curious about one thing you mentioned. You didn't use the word manipulation, but relating to someone having a vision or imposing it and then wanting a change. And this made me think that, no, I was curious. Yeah, now Gordon, maybe you can just cut out my my rambling. Yes. You mentioned before about the opportunity or the hope to just change one person's mind, and the difficulty of many of the leadership who just maybe want to use a change process for their own benefit, for the short-term win. Would you, and I spoke to a podcast guest and she had the beautiful title for that. It's called Facilitation. So you use facilitation to basically manipulate a group for the goal of one person. So there is an outcome that is basically predefined.
Yeah.
How would you react to that? Would you still take it up and say, maybe I can change one person's mind and do still something good? Or is there an ethical thing that you say, cannot do this to the group because I can sense the second agenda?
Rephrase that. I didn't quite.
If a client approaches you to ask for a workshop or a change project, where you can sense that it's for their short-term benefit instead of the bigger idea contribution to the organization.
Yeah, well, I had a situation like that when I was invited into this company. It was in somewhere in the Midwest, I can't remember. And what they wanted was, they wanted me, just as you described earlier, they wanted me to fix the team. They wanted to become agile, and they said, we are agile, we management, we get it, and the teams don't. And so I took him at his word. I just thought, I'm not going to doubt you right now. And but I did say to him, I said, well, I can certainly come and start off with a workshop there, just to kind of like learn something about the group and go over some basics of agile. It'd be great if you could join that workshop. And his response was that I don't need to, because I already know it. So I was a little bit wary there. Anyway, when I worked with this group of developers and testers, they got it. They knew what agility was. They knew how, because we don't even have to use the word agile to see if people are agile, actually agile with a small a, adjective agile. They were very adaptive, and they were very collaborative with each other. And what it turned out was, what management wanted is, they saw agile to mean we can change our mind anytime we want, and everyone else has to fall into line with us. right? So that's what agile meant to the management team. And what the people on the ground doing the work were overwhelmed by the constant changes. They couldn't ever finish anything. So they were in a situation that true agile had come along to fix, this constant churn and constant demands and changing of direction. And that's not agility, that's just chaos, you know. It's top-down threat. And so it was
So how
really,
did you fix the management?
well, I tried, you know, I did. I worked with the teams, and it became, and we did, we reorganized, the teams reorganized themselves actually into more cross-functional units rather than separate testers and developers. They created cross-functional teams, and it made a big difference into their productivity. But management was still making these changes and demands, and it was quite unreasonable, and people started threatening to leave. And and then, you know, I tried to do some work with the executive team there, and I was invited in, and I did some work, and it didn't go down that well. And ultimately I was let go. But then the odd thing was, the CTO who had invited me in called me about a year later for the new company he was now working for to come in there. And so it's just like, have you not learned anything? I didn't go back. But no, you know, there are some people just don't want to change, do they? They want other people to change. I mean, that's the biggest problem, I think, isn't it? And we see this in other walks of life, with parents sending their children to therapy. Same
Humankind,
thing.
right?
Huh?
With humankind, we always want everyone else to
Yeah,
change.
we want everyone else around us to change, don't we? Yeah. I've got a friend who's an improviser as a living. He makes his living through theater improvisation, yeah. And he has this mantra that I learned from him and I really like, and it's this: the rules only apply to me. And when I don't like what someone else is doing, I kind of bring that up for myself. I go, oh yeah, the rules only apply to me, not to him, not to her, only to me. And it's a really freeing, amazingly freeing thing, because you stop kind of like trying to fix other people. And you just look at, okay, what can I do? You know, what can I change within the rules? You know, what can I change? And
beautiful mantra.
It's lovely, isn't it? Yeah. I know. I mean, I'd love to say I live up to it every day. I don't.
And it's funny because when you first hear it, it might occur like almost anarchistic, nihilistic point of view. Oh, I have my own rules.
Yeah, it's not that though.
But it's not that. It's no, they apply only to me, so I cannot expect others to play by my.
No, like the rules of the road, or you know, waiting at traffic lights or whatever. Someone else is going to do something wrong on the highway. You don't have to. Yeah. You can keep your distance from them. That's what you can do. That would be the wise thing, right? But you can't change it. You can't fix them.
Yeah.
But you don't have to follow their lead. Go through the red light also.
Yeah, I think we also cannot convince anyone. You can only convince yourself.
I know. But we put so much effort into that, don't we? Funny. And I have, you know, I try not to anymore, but I probably still do. I still do. I do that with my kids.
I think it's human nature.
Yeah.
There's something in us that we do have the urge to convince the entire world around us to play by our rules.
Yeah. I think there's the difference, and I think perhaps the only thing I've learned in life is that you're right, we all do that. But some of us are able to see that we're doing it. And that's a crucial difference, isn't it? And it's when you don't see that you're doing it that things don't go well. But those that see that they're doing it, they have a choice then. They can stop. They can do something different. They can own it.
Yeah.
Right. And that changes an awful lot when people own their stuff.
Yeah. And I think that's for me the core and high art of coaching and facilitation.
Yeah.
Where you have this awareness, you own it. And you might even be mature enough or fast enough to catch yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
What is your biggest number one facilitation challenge?
Gosh, I don't know if there is one big overriding thing. I would, you know, a few years ago, I would have said maybe a decade ago, I would have said working with groups who don't want to be there. But it's not. But if it's a challenge, it is obviously still a challenge, but it's one I enjoy now. I enjoy that challenge because I can rise to it. I've learned how to come up to that challenge. And it's really quite simple. It's, you know, part of it is just hearing, first of all, hearing the concerns or the complaints, and recognizing that they're real, and asking people to just acknowledge it. Let's just put it down for today, and we can pick it up again tomorrow. So today, leave it at the door, and on the way out, you can take it, you can throw it back in the room, bring it with you tomorrow, or whatever. And of course, they don't have that concern by the next day. And people are usually willing to do that if you ask them nicely. You know, so, look, I know you didn't choose to be here, but you are here. So you can be unhappy, or you can leave that unhappiness and that cynicism at the door, and we can see what goes on and see what happens here. And it might be interesting.
Yeah.
And they're kind of like a little bit curious then, right? And so they want to. And usually by the next day, they're quite happy to continue.
And very often just acknowledging that it's okay that they don't want to be there.
Yeah.
Not playing their game of confrontation.
Yeah. I'll tell you what I think the biggest block to facilitation is people who know. That's the biggest block. It is. I'm my own worst enemy when I know stuff. Because when I know stuff, I can't hear. My ears get blocked up. And so that is a big block to learning, isn't it? And the facilitator is there to create a learning environment. You can't learn if you've got, you know, so, if you already know.
Yes. Oh, thank you for bringing up the challenge. How to create curiosity within people who know? And maybe there are some in the group who do have a very deep and large amount of knowledge, right? And still there's something to learn, even if you know a lot, especially from the group. So how do you facilitate it for them to be more open?
Well, you know, questions like asking people, because when someone is blocked and they have the answers, you can ask them. A colleague I've just did some work with recently, you know, put a lot of emphasis on the term unlearning. He basically, I didn't like the technique, but he's basically revealed to them what they didn't know. He got them to answer some questions and showed them that they were wrong, which is cruel. But it was kind of effective. You know, I wouldn't use that technique myself, but I could see why he did it. And he did it with care. But the result of it was people felt a bit hurt by it, I think. But the result of it was they did kind of begrudgingly have to acknowledge that they didn't know as much as they thought they knew. And that's one technique, and it's not one that I would go for. But you know, I think continuing to ask questions about people's knowledge. Some people really believe they know and really believe they have the answers, and nothing else will do. Those people are better not to have in the room, essentially, because they can tarnish the learning environment quite seriously, actually. And I think it's really important to recognize that early and to ask people to leave when they're clearly not there to learn, because there's no point in them being there if they're not. Really.
Yeah. It reminds me of the improv game or the exercise for the yes and as opposed to yes but.
Yeah.
And those I know it all are almost always these yes but persons.
But people, yeah.
Yes, of course you're saying that, but we've done it for 20 years, but there's a better thing, but we figured it out already.
Yeah. I know. I mean, you know, using improv games in workshops can be quite effective if people are willing to try that. But, you know, very often that kind of person wouldn't even contemplate that. And you have to play those games with the real just a sense of the room and the space and the people, and is it the right thing to do at this time?
Or maybe as similar to what you suggested earlier for the leadership team, or with the leader who is not into slowing down, who is not into getting personal and maybe having a one-on-one with them and seeing what is actually blocking them from learning. Because most of the time it is also a mask. Because those who,
Yes, yeah.
I worked most of my professional life within universities, so with highly intelligent people. And what characterizes them is that they know what they don't know. So if they are surrounded with peers that they respect. So I think there are many different things that can block us from wanting to know. Either lack of respect for the group, or wearing a mask, being afraid.
It is a fear thing very often, isn't it? And I think that the more you get promoted based on your knowledge, the harder it becomes to admit that you don't know, because it undermines your whole presence in the organization, your role, your title, your position, your salary, your window seat, whatever. They're all threatened by saying I don't know.
Could be a nice exercise to just force them to.
The organizations that do well with this kind of creating a learning environment are the ones that don't just say they embrace failure, but do actually embrace failure. It's very easy now to say these things, isn't it? Lots of organizations have heard, oh, this is what we're supposed to do, but they don't really do it, And, the ones that truly embrace it really do allow people to not know. That's the thing. It's just allowing people to not know.
And then almost by design, you will make mistakes and fail. And then it's all about controlled failure, right? I mean, if you're a drug company, you don't want to fail and kill your patients. If you're a lawyer, you don't want to fail and bring the wrong people to jail. But then how can you fail in a rather safe environment, which is a team?
Yeah. Well, it's keeping in the IT world. I wouldn't really like to speak to those other situations, but in the IT world, it's containing failures to be short term, to be quick. So rather than building a project and following a plan and finding out after 3 months we built the wrong thing and nobody wants to buy it, that's a big failure, right? But if we can discover within a few days or weeks, or even hours sometimes, whether something is going to be viable or not, then we save ourselves a huge amount of money. And the failure is it becomes not even a failure, it just becomes a moment of learning. We learn something new, we're going to not go that way, we're going to go this way instead, we're going to change direction at this point. And the sooner we can do that, so it's fast failure, but it's not really failure at all. It ends
Fail forward. And then it's not about failing culture, but learning culture. Right?
Learning culture, yeah. I think, that's the important, but what people don't recognize is that in order to learn, you do have to fail. You just do. It's just part of it. But putting the emphasis on culture of failure is not really going to get a lot of buy-in from people in the corporate world. So you have to reframe it a bit.
Someone recently told me that if you're not progressing enough, you're not failing enough. And people who are more successful than you are have just failed more often.
Yeah.
I really like that.
Yeah.
How do we fail a workshop?
How do you fail a workshop?
What's a failed workshop? What makes a workshop fail?
Gosh, I suppose where people walk out the same as when they came in. That's a failure, isn't it? They need to come out different in some way. A workshop is a story, and any story that ends up in the same place that it started from is the most boring story. It's not a story, right? It's just drivel. A lot of children's books are like that. Stories have to take someone on a journey and bring them out anew. So they might end up back in the same place they started, like Odysseus did, but he doesn't come back the same person. He comes back a changed person. And so we want people to go back to work after this week or 2 days or 1 day, or whatever it is, but they go back into work differently. And I put a lot of emphasis on that in my workshops. I won't let people just leave. I say, you've got to leave with intent. what are you going to do when you go to work tomorrow? What's different for you? What are you going to, what action will you take to show that things are different? And it's really important for people to have that sense of like, this is not an end, this is a start. It's a start. And so people who are not able to do that, and I don't really encounter this, to be honest, but I can see it could happen. You know, people just leave the same as when they came in and nothing's changed. That would feel very sad. I would want to give people a refund if that happened, I think.
And it's interesting because when I think of who could be these persons, they're mostly the I already know person, because you're just not open to new information and any possible change or transformation.
But you know, some people come in like that and they don't leave like that. So there is, and honestly, there is also this other aspect of it, let's be clear, in that sometimes people do know a lot and sometimes I can learn from them. And so it's, I think a successful facilitated environment is a multi-way learning environment where everyone learns from everyone else. It's not me teaching them something, it's everyone is learning something from each other. So you're creating this crisscrossing matrix of knowledge and experience and story. It's all of that, you know, and then people are getting richer for it. And that's when it's a really successful workshop. And sometimes the know-it-all person contributes greatly to that situation, and they start to melt a little bit because they realize they don't have to know everything. It's okay not to know certain things, you know, but they also can share what they do know, and that's really vital too. So I wouldn't I don't want to denigrate people and say just because they're like know-it-alls. They're not all, they are sometimes, but they actually do know. That's also true. And I value that. I value those people in workshops.
Yeah, and then it's all about integrating them in a way that everyone benefits, including themselves.
You know, I've noticed that there's a pattern, and this is true, very true when you go into an organization, that people are sort of coerced into being there. But sometimes in the public workshops I do, two or three people will come from the same organization, and you can tell that there's one who was sort of dragged along. There's some resistance there, and there's a sort of yes butness to them. And there's like, I know what I'm doing, I know my job, I don't really need to be here. And it doesn't always go away. It just kind of hovers in the background. But it's always a presence there, and it's not very pleasant to have. But it's not blatant enough that you want to say to that person, I think this is not the right environment for you. It just sort of hovers below the surface, and that's difficult. That's probably one of the most. And
on the other hand, sometimes we just don't know what happens afterwards.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
Because it will marinate.
I know. My friend who does what I do, he lives in Buenos Aires, he says to his students, he says at the end of the workshop, if all goes well, how does he put it? It's something about you will have learned something you don't know that you've learned. You know, you would have learned many things and you have no idea you've learned them, and they will emerge over the next few months. Something like he says it better. But I quite like that. I mean, it sounds a bit arrogant, but I still quite like it because it's true. I think it's true. I had an experience once. The very first time I taught a Scrum certification class, I had a guy, German guy, Wolfgang, his name was, and he was the yes but man. You know, yeah, but my organization, yeah, but we couldn't do it like that. Yeah, but we got this and we got this problem. And it was always, everything was like, no, it won't work. It won't work. But about a year later, maybe more actually, maybe a year or 2 years later, he suddenly appeared on the Scrum discussion group that I was on at that time. It's a long time ago. I think it was a Yahoo group still back then. But he suddenly appeared on there, and he was talking about how great Scrum was and how his team had been using Scrum for the last year, and they were really successful, and he was promoting Scrum to all of these other people on the group. And I saw his name and I thought, oh, wow, that's the guy who didn't want to do Scrum. So you don't know. Yeah. And when he left it after 2 days, I thought, okay, well, he didn't get it, and that's that. But it wasn't. And it wasn't that he went off somewhere else and got better knowledge. He actually thanked me and my co-trainer in one of these posts to say, I didn't, it took me a while, but I got it. So yeah, right there, we don't know what happens later, do we? And I think that's important about, like, for a facilitator to stay in their integrity and not try to adjust their style or their way of being to suit the group. I've made the mistake of doing that in the past. I've had exercises that I've particularly known are beneficial and helpful, and I thought, I can't do that exercise with this group because they won't like it, which is always a mistake. But because when I have done it, when I think that and I do it anyway, it's usually successful, and sometimes even more successful than it has been when I think it's okay, you know. So
I know this so well.
really hard sometimes, though. Just think, I can't, these people are going to hate this, you know, they're going to hate this thing. But we're always surprised, I think, because every single person we work with is just a human being like us, with all of the fears and worries and good, you know, experiences and bad experiences, and I don't know, you know, there's always, below whatever facade we put out, there's something beautiful there, and we get the privilege of tapping into that sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's really a lovely thing, and it really is it is an honor to do this kind of work.
Yeah. And I tend to believe that the moment where we doubt that this exercise will be appropriate for the group, it won't work for them. I had this so many times. And every time that I then skipped the exercise, I regretted it.
Yeah.
And when I put my courage together to do it, it just created magic.
Yeah.
And now thinking back, I think it's something that triggers me in the group, that suddenly makes me lose my confidence. Maybe it's one individual who suddenly makes me doubt my own process, my confidence. And then it's all about the inner game. So it's not about the group when we start doubting, it's about ourselves and our trigger moments.
Yes, it is.
So yes, I totally agree that
it's my own, for me, it's my own fear of judgment or something coming in, or not being able to handle the rejection or something like that, you know. But yeah, it's like, I like that phrase, it's the inner game. Yeah, it's not about the group, it's about me. And when I override those moments, it's like you said, it's usually a really fascinating experience, actually. But it's, you know, I don't know, I probably love to do a bit more analysis on this, but it makes me wonder, like, when it does go so well, when you think it's going to go so badly, what is the magic that happens there? What is it that's stopping me wanting to do it? And what is it that makes it go well? And what's the relationship between those two sensations? You know, it's really, it's quite interesting, isn't it? Because there's a sharp kind of dichotomy there. It's not just like, hey, great group, we're going to do this exercise and it all kind of runs smoothly. It's just like, oh, this is going to be awful. Oh,
yeah, there's resistance.
Yeah, and then so there's this these opposite sides of the pole or something. And
I wonder, I'm thinking out loud, and I wonder whether the group kind of sends the extra level of trust. Because the moment where the moment where I decide not to do the exercise is basically I'm judging the group that they won't get it, or it won't work, they're not good enough, something about that. And the moment we do it anyway is we're overcoming judgment and replace it by trust. Oh, it's going to be fine. Trust in ourselves, but also ourselves just as a kind of mirror to the group. And
it's really interesting. Yeah. And I think you're right. I think that there's a lot of unspoken stuff happening in a room full of people, isn't there? And I think that there may well be people picking up on your fear or my fear, and feeling a sense of being cared for when we come through our own fear towards them, because our fear is taking us away, isn't it? It's taking us away from the other people, and the overriding of the fear is bringing us back towards them. And people want that. They want to be, we want that. They want others to come towards them. We don't want to expel people.
Yeah, because it's all about trust.
Yeah.
And I think even if we sometimes, the reasons why we choose white lies or sugarcoat situations is usually because we somehow don't trust the person to roll with it. I want to make their life better. I don't want to make it so hard. And it's a judgment.
Yeah,
It's
there's
basically we're
also a lot of
judging them.
arrogance in that, isn't there?
Yeah.
Really, about wanting it to make it easy for someone else.
Yeah.
This is why I'm a bit doubtful about the use of the word facilitator, right? Because it is about, why should I make someone's life easier? Now, who am I to judge that they need me to make it easy and not challenging and not confronting them? I don't want to confront them because it will hurt their feelings, but that's not my choice to make, really. I think providing, there's got to be a kindness to this always, isn't there? You know, a good check-in for a confrontation is these three things. Is it true? Is it kind? Is it necessary? And it has to pass those three things really before you step outside of that social zone and do something like confront someone's behavior. Obviously, it has to be true. Can you do it in a kind way? And does it have to be done now? Is it necessary? Or can it just be left alone? You know, can we just leave it?
Yeah, necessary to what end?
Yeah.
Is it just for me because I need to feel the satisfaction? Oh, this goes into the kind way, right?
Yeah. I think, I mean, the necessary question is in the context we're in, you know, is it going to cause more hurt? Or is it going to move things forward in a positive way? You don't know. You just have to make a guess sometimes, don't you? But if you don't think about it, you definitely won't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I've enjoyed talking with you.
Yeah.
Lots of alignment. Good ways. Two-way learning, you see. I was like, oh, that's a great idea.
Yeah, that's the beauty of a nice conversation with an experienced facilitator.
Yeah, it was lovely. I really enjoyed that. Yeah. It got me thinking, you know, that when you asked me to come on here, my thought when people talk to me about facilitation, I do think of being in front of a group, or not in front necessarily, but in a room with a group of people. But there's so much more to facilitation, isn't there, than that? And this idea of facilitating space or rooms or environments and relationships is really important as well. There's a lot to it. It's a lovely word, facilitate, and we've got to be cautious with it. And sometimes I think I love the word difficultator, as you probably know, comes from Augustus Boel's work. Just a joker in the pack kind of thing. You're not there to make it easy for people. You're there to ask them difficult questions and challenge them, have them pushing their edge a bit. And I think that's what we need to do as Scrum Masters or facilitators. All of that.
Yeah, as long as we come from a place of care. So kindness.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you have to love people to do this work. You really do, and you have to have it, and it's got to be genuine. It's not just like I like you, or I don't like you when you behave like that. It's just like unconditional love. Sometimes it's almost like enemy love. You've got to even have that. You've got to have the ability to love the person who's just making your life miserable as well, you know, and just say, well, no, embrace them. But yeah, it is unconditional. So hard, but we strive for it, right? If I don't strive for it, I'll never get there, and I often fall short, very often fall short, but I just try it again differently, you know, but that makes the work worthwhile.
Yeah, and I think that's why facilitators are a very special breed, those who do it as profession, because they care. And it's and if we do a good job, we get the gift from individuals and groups to have a look into their worlds and their ways of thinking and their lives. Just very unique.
Yeah, I think, you know, there are obviously training courses you can go on to become a facilitator, but I think the real learning is in these multi-learning environments, right? So all that I do today, I've learned over 30 years from almost every single person I've ever been in a room with. There's been something that's rubbed off on me, or some mistake that I've made that I regretted and decided not to ever do that again. you know, so a person I might have hurt in a room, in fact, I've come away with growth from that. Maybe they have too. But yeah, it's not, you know, you can't learn this stuff in a classroom. You learn it by doing it, I think.
And you cannot learn it without the pain, without the hurt, without the failure. Yeah.
It has to come with that, doesn't it? And we do our best to mitigate it and to make amends if we genuinely do things wrong or badly. That's happened a couple of times too. But, we're all human.
Yeah. If a listener made it up to this point, what would you like them to take away from our conversation?
I suppose this idea of this title of this talk is Difficultator, and I think that I would like the listener to contemplate that word and consider what it might mean to them. You know, to me, it means to confront with compassion and to challenge, to help people push their own edge, not to push someone to the edge, but to help them to find their own edge and to push beyond that. But yeah, to contemplate the word difficultator and see what that might mean. And how does it sit with facilitator? How does it walk hand in hand with facilitator? Yeah.
Thank you.
It's my pleasure. It really was. Thank you very much for inviting me here. It's been a good chat.
Yeah. Dum, da, da, dum. The end of my podcast jingle.